Candles tremble against stone. Breath gathers before a hymn. A bell folds the dusk into a single note. Hands touch, shoulders and sleeves. A mother presses a palm to a child's crown. An old man closes his eyes and remembers the name he could not speak all week. Faith draws the scattered into a circle. It slows the pulse. It gives a day its meaning. It makes rooms feel held. In most seasons, this is all it asks. Sit, listen, share bread, carry one another. A text is opened. A story is told. There is an ordinary holiness here that does not need to be loud. It is the sound of relief. Grief finds a bench. Joy finds a frame. People who disagree about everything else sing the same tune for 3 minutes and call it peace. But peace changes in hard weather. Scarcity arrives. Rumors arrive. Sickness arrives. Anxious leaders feel time shorten. The circle tightens. The words that once invited begin to instruct. The caution meant for a moment becomes a habit. The habit becomes a rule. The rule finds paper and a keeper of keys. So begins the hinge of our story. No one sets out to make harm sacred. Most actors believe they are protecting the good. A minister worries about scandal. A magistrate worries about order. A parent worries about a child's eternal future. Each worry is human. Each, under pressure, can harden into a certainty that forgets people. That is the first step. Not malice, but a confusion of care with control. We can see the steps if we watch them closely. A private vision becomes a public model. A model becomes a form. A form becomes a requirement. The room changes shape around the paper. Elders learn to ask whether a statement matches the form, not whether a life can bear its weight. Ordinary members learn to speak in phrases that sound right. Dissent does not disappear. It leaves, or it hides. The room grows quiet in the wrong way. History is full of such rooms. A village meeting house in 1692, where winter was long and fear had a legal name. A besieged city in 1534, where prophecy became municipal code. An empire of purpose in the 1850s, led by a messianic claimant who promised heaven and delivered a furnace. A commune in the 1970s, where idealists went to build a just world and ended with no exit. The prayers differed. The pattern did not. Certainty outran humility. Authority outran accountability. Compassion lost the calendar. Listen to the words that announce the shift. We cannot wait. We cannot risk confusion. We must draw lines. Purity must be guarded. Lines have value when they protect the vulnerable. Lines do harm when they defend abstractions at a person's expense. You can tell them apart by who pays. If the cost is always borne by the weak, the line is not a boundary, it is a weapon. Also, watch the verbs. They change from invite to require, from comfort to correct, from ask to compel. A healthy community still corrects. Love tells the truth. But love gives time and context. Panic removes both. Panic calls haste a virtue. Haste makes procedures that shorten conscience. Those procedures are efficient. Efficiency is attractive to frightened people. It feels like safety. It is only speed. In anxious years, leaders reach for tools that look righteous and work quickly. Some are theatrical. Most are not. They are schedules and checklists and forms that do not allow space for story. They are curated testimonies and closed meetings. They are readings of sacred texts that assume one voice and ban the rest. They are appeals to unity that punish nuance. They are praise for obedience that disguises fear. They are the quiet rearrangements of rooms and calendars that make dissent seem rude. The faithful are not fools. They notice the change. A few speak up early. They ask for patience. They ask for witnesses. They ask for plural leadership. They ask for the right to say, I don't know, and still be welcome. If the room is healthy, those voices steady it. If the room is brittle, those voices are labeled trouble. Once labeled, they are easy to move aside. The first person moved aside is a warning for the rest. Warnings do not need to be shouted. They can be as small as a seat left empty. What turns worry into structure? Paper, titles, keys. The clerical world and the civic world share this. They translate fear into steps. Once steps exist, people follow them even after the fear subsides. The form remains after the emergency ends. It begins to justify itself by the number of cases processed. Numbers comfort anxious leaders. They feel like progress. They are only totals. At this point, faith and law touch shoulders. Each borrows the other's confidence. The devout say they protect eternity. The magistrates say they protect the town. Between them stand families who want to belong. Most choose safety. Safety is the strongest promise a leader can make. It is also the easiest to break. In the breaking, harm becomes invisible behind purpose. You can hear purpose in court language: held, brought, delivered, committed toward. You can hear it in church language: confessed, repented, restored. These are good words when freely chosen. They become tools when chosen for someone. A forced confession still looks neat in a ledger. A coerced repentance still fits the form. A restored membership can hide a broken conscience. The surface stays smooth. The damage moves inside. We must say this bluntly. Faith is not the enemy of this story. It is the prize. It deserves better than fear made holy. The target is not any one religion or people. It is a pattern that humans build under strain. The pattern favors certainty that cannot be questioned, leaders who cannot be corrected, and narratives that cannot be tested. Wherever those three gather, harm finds a seat. This is why we begin with the room and the paper. They teach us to look at structures, not monsters. Monsters satisfy the tale. Structures explain the count. A law that shortens process turns a warning into a verdict. A policy that lowers the threshold for evidence turns rumor into proof. A rule that calls doubt betrayal turns neighbors into informants. None of these need gore to ruin a life. They work by removing air. Against this, the best guardrails are dull. Plural leadership, published reasons, outside review, time to think, the right to say no without exile, rituals that care for the person, not the appearance of purity, sacred texts read with humility about language and history, teachers who teach the difference between certainty and faith. These protect the faithful from the worst of their own fear. They do not make rooms exciting, they make them safe. Yet even dull guardrails can be dismissed. We have no time. We face an enemy. This is not the year for nuance. We must cleanse. These are the phrases that end patience. Once patience ends, exaggeration arrives. Exaggeration rushes to fill the space where nuance stood. It gives numbers to rumors. It gives labels to neighbors. It gives urgency to punishments that once required reflection. It is not dramatic at first. It is administrative. We will not tell this story with relish. We will tell it with dates and rooms and weather and names. We will tell it with the care a hard topic requires. We will not use one community's failure to mock another's faith. We will not hide the good work many did under the same roofs. We will show both. A ledger that bent a line to hurry a verdict. A letter that begged for calm. A sermon that warned against haste and was remembered as weak. A judge who paused and was called soft. A clerk who checked a latch 3 times because last winter he checked it twice and never forgot the sound that followed. We begin, then, where all patterns become visible. The threshold. Above, the room that speaks. Below, the room that holds. Between them, a person with keys. Around them, people with prayers. The air thickens when fear comes. The door swings faster. Voices grow shorter. Files grow longer. We will walk this threshold in several places and centuries. We will ask how certainty learned to speak as compassion, while compassion fell silent. Before we do, hold one image. A child falls asleep on a bench while her parents sing. A neighbor rests a hand on a shoulder. A candle steadies. The room breathes together. This is what faith does at its best. It knits, it mends, it forgives. If we seem severe in what follows, it is because we honor that good and grieve what can happen to it. When structures fail, They do not only wound the accused, they wound the practice that gave us comfort in the first place. So here is our aim. We will trace the hinge. We will name the tools that made it swing. We will listen for the tone that announced the turn. We will follow the paper that summoned the room. We will step from a chapel to a hall, from a hall to a court, from a court to a cell, and back again. We will resist spectacle. We will prefer receipts to rumor. We will keep room for doubt. We will keep reverence for those who believed honestly and were hurt by the forms they trusted. The bell fades. The door waits. The first page waits. It is time to watch a private conviction, learn public steps. It is time to see how a sentence becomes a rule, and a rule becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a system that forgets the face in front of it. We open the file not to pass judgment on belief, but to learn how to keep belief from becoming a file. And then, with the page lit and the air steady, we ask the question that leads us forward. How does a room of consolation become a room of control? And who decided the moment the hinge began to turn? Begin with a whisper. One person is moved by a story, a verse, a dream that steadies the heart. The whisper becomes a sentence. The sentence becomes a rule. The rule becomes a form that someone must fill. Each step feels modest. Each step feels helpful. But steps add up. They make a staircase. And once a staircase exists, someone will send others up and down it in the name of good order. First comes the translation into text. A homily becomes a set of points. A pastor's counsel becomes a line in a handbook. A caution for a troubled week becomes a standing instruction. Clergy gather and draft statements to keep doctrine clear. Councils meet to prevent disputes from fracturing communities. Uniform words promise unity. They also begin to prefer sameness over story. The paper does not remember why a sentence was written. It remembers only that it was. Then comes the translation into office. If there is a text, there must be stewards of the text. Roles appear. A board to supervise teaching. A magistrate to apply law. A consistory to hear complaints. An examiner to test doctrine. Titles multiply. Seals multiply. The work, at first, is careful. Offices, at their best, stand between heat and harm. But offices also have incentives. They must show results. In fearful seasons, results look like speed. A slow answer reads as weakness. A gentle one reads as compromise. Careers begin to align with the number of cases handled, not the number of people restored. Finally comes the translation into process. Process decides who speaks first, who must be present, what counts as proof, how long a silence can last before it is called defiance. Whether the accused may ask questions, whether the reasons for a verdict are written in plain words, good process slows the hand. It allows conscience to breathe. Anxious process shortens every pause. It names delay as danger. It calls nuance a loophole. It teaches decent people to move without looking down. This turn is old, though it wears new clothing in every age. In the early 13th century, church and town courts in many regions drew back from trial by ordeal. Clergy were barred from blessing the hot iron and the cold water. Procedure grew in the empty space. Oaths and depositions replaced miracle tests. Confession rose in value. Files thickened. The intention was fairness. The effect was also enclosure. Justice moved indoors. The room gained power because the room now held the steps. Printing pressed the steps into more hands. Catechisms and manuals traveled faster than teachers could. Summaries helped the many learn what the few had debated. Summaries also flattened debate. A sentence written to soften a hard practice in one village hardened a different practice in another. Language crossed borders better than context did. A phrase about purity, born in a time of scandal, became a policy in a time of peace. A phrase about obedience, born to stop a riot, became a way to measure piety in a quiet year. Metrics followed. Leaders love what they can count. Cases opened. Cases closed. Confessions obtained. Repentances performed. Excommunications issued. Restorations celebrated. Numbers comfort anxious rooms. They tell the room it is working, but numbers rarely ask whether the work is kind. A ledger cannot feel a bruise you cannot see. A table of outcomes cannot hear a child ask why a door is shut. Notice how language shifts as process hardens. Words of invitation drift toward words of command. Come and consider becomes appear and answer. Let us talk becomes state your position. Do not be afraid becomes do not question the order. None of these phrases are evil by themselves, but together they signal a change of air. Members learn to speak safely. They learn the tone that survives a panel. They learn to hide the parts of a story that do not fit a form. A community can keep meeting long after it has stopped truly speaking. Documents that once consoled start to accuse. A short list for self-examination becomes a required script for public remorse. A pledge written to bind a violent man to peace becomes a routine pledge for anyone who disagrees too loudly. A note that a visitor should be chaperoned becomes a blanket rule that calls ordinary friendship suspect. The path of least resistance is always generalization. The target of generalization is always the person least able to defend a particular day in a particular life. Economics join the file. Processes cost money. Custody costs money. Investigations cost money. In many towns, the keeper of order charges fees for time, for straw, for paper, for light. A poor family pays with hours and with humiliation. A wealthy family pays with coin. The result looks even on paper. The result does not feel even. Systems that monetize comfort will hurt the poor while congratulating themselves on neutrality. Systems that prize speed will hurt the reflective while praising themselves for courage. Watch how leadership shifts under strain. When fear rises, leaders get smaller circles. Advisors who ask for patience are thanked and not invited back. Reports that confirm the plan float to the top. Reports that complicate the plan are labeled not actionable. Meetings become performances of unity. Those who hesitate learn to hesitate in private. Those who doubt learn to doubt alone. Doubt is not a sin here. It is a risk. Risk grows expensive. Expensive things get hidden. Rituals change temperature. Practices designed to heal begin to sting. Confession turns from a gift to a test. Public prayer turns into a stage where certain phrases keep a person safe. Fasts become signals. Silence becomes a strategy. Sometimes this is accidental. Sometimes it is policy. Either way, the person moves to the edges of the room. Compliance takes the center. The law borrows the sacred voice. The sacred borrows the law's posture. It is a powerful duet. The court says it protects bodies. The altar says it protects souls. Families trying to belong stand between both and nod. They nod because belonging is oxygen. They nod because dissent now seems selfish. They nod because the stories from the pulpit and the orders from the bench sound like two harmonies of the same tune. In that harmony, a human face can blur into a case. Mechanisms of proof adjust to meet the tempo. Testimony looms larger. Hearsay slips in when thresholds fall. Reputation counts as evidence. The extraordinary is admitted when the ordinary feels too slow. Confessions carry special weight even when obtained under exhaustion or shame. None of this needs spectacle. It needs only a few clauses. Given the urgency of the present danger, in light of prior reports, for the sake of the community, clauses are gentle tools that cut very deep. When a mistake is uncovered, the structure often doubles down. A false charge should trigger humility. It should tighten standards and widen counsel. It should make leaders speak softer for a season. Under pressure, the opposite happens. The mistake is recast as proof of a deeper threat. New layers are added. Screens are widened. Exceptions are narrowed. Appeals travel in circles that lead back to the first desk. The architecture looks stronger because it is thicker. Strength and thickness are not the same thing. There are guardrails that work. Plural leadership protects against the single gaze. Published reasons protect against secret heat. Independent review protects against the comfort of hearing only one's own voice. Calendars that mandate time for reflection protect against adrenaline dressed as zeal. The right to stay and disagree protects against exile by euphemism. Sacred texts read with attention to genre and history protect against turning poetry into policy by mistake. Communities that build these habits bend. They do not break. And yet even good guardrails are fragile when scarcity bites. War, disease, and rumor tell leaders that time is short. Shame tells them that changing course will look like failure. Group loyalty whispers that admitting error will feed an enemy. In that weather, the dullest virtues feel like luxuries. The pen moves faster, the meeting grows shorter, the door closes sooner. The habit of listening goes first. The landscape outside the room also matters. A city hurt by famine wants a clean answer. A village shaken by a scandal wants a clean example. A congregation who feels mocked by its neighbors wants a clean victory. Clean is the wrong word for human things. Human things are muddy. Human things need time and second drafts. Efficiency, at such moments, becomes a moral pose. It sells well. It spends lives. You can hear the system teaching itself by the stories it prefers. Stories with tidy endings. Stories where doubt is the trait of the villain. Stories where the person who pauses is the one who caused the trouble. When these stories dominate, sharp people go quiet or go away. The community loses the people who could have warned it in time. It keeps the people who can repeat the lines. The room grows safer for leaders and less safe for truth. If all this feels abstract, look at the paperwork itself. Look at the form that asks only yes or no questions. Look at the checkbox that stands in for a family's year. Look at the signature that belongs to a tired person at dusk. Look at the margin where a clerk scribbles resolved when no one in the room was actually resolved. Bureaucracy is not wicked by nature. It is blunt by nature. Blunt tools need careful hands. We should also speak of the people pressed into the gears. The minor official who needs his job. The teacher who fears losing access to his students. The parent who wants her child welcomed. The elder who worries that revising a policy will disgrace the last elder. The scribe who wants a straight line. None of them wake wanting to harm a neighbor. They wake wanting to do right. A bad structure can make doing right indistinguishable from doing harm quickly. This is the hinge. Private conviction has become public rule. The rule has become a habit. The habit has become a room. The room has a schedule. The schedule has a keeper. The keeper has a ring of keys. Everything feels normal. Everything feels necessary. And then a case arrives that does not fit the form. A story arrives that does not bend to the rule. The system has a choice. It can change shape, or it can change the person until the person fits. In some times and places, reformers forced the first choice. They widened the circle of counsel. They slowed hearings. They raised the threshold for proof. They let people leave without losing family. They granted silence its dignity. They taught that an apology without freedom is theater. They insisted that sacred words are not weapons and should never be used like one. These were not spectacular acts. They were patient ones. They saved lives. In other times and places, the second choice won. It said the stakes were too high for scruple. It said purity demanded speed. It said unity could not afford dissent. It said mercy would be misread as weakness. It said fear was wisdom. It said many things in solemn voices. The door clicked. The file closed. The ledger line lay straight. We have not named the faces yet. We will. We will step into rooms where theology met law. We will watch how leaders learn to hear only what confirmed them. We will read margins where someone begged for patience. We will measure what happened when patience lost. To do that well, we need one more step. We need to name the engine that turns all these parts at once. It has three main cogs: certainty, charisma, closed circuits. When they mesh, the staircase climbs by itself. Shall we lift the cover and watch the teeth catch? Lift the cover. See the teeth catch. Three cogs turn, and everything around them begins to move. Certainty, charisma, closed circuits. Each can be useful. Together, under pressure, they learn to devour nuance. They learn to speak as virtue while they thin out mercy. Once they mesh, even decent people feel the pull. Begin with certainty. At its best, certainty is the grip you need on a stormy night. A mother holds a child and says, "This is true." The child sleeps. Communities need that kind of anchor. But watch how certainty changes once it becomes a weapon. It stops asking questions. It stops admitting scale. It stops saying, "I might be wrong." It learns to talk in absolutes because absolutes are quick. They cut through fear like a knife through cloth. They also cut people. Certainty is attractive in a panic because uncertainty is exhausting. Doubt takes time. Doubt requires patience, memory, and humility. Fear says there is no time, so leaders simplify. They choose a single rule to stand for a set of values. They push that rule into every corner. They punish what does not fit. The rule becomes the definition of faithfulness. The person becomes a test of the rule. The test grows simpler as the anxiety grows sharper. It feels like wisdom. It is only speed. Certainty has a sound. It speaks in short claims that end debate. This is what it means. This is who we are. This is how the faithful behave. It offers a bright line and calls the line compassion, because a bright line can keep some people from harm. Lines do help when they protect the vulnerable, but lines drawn for protection must leave room to face the person in front of you. When certainty refuses the face, it stops being a boundary and becomes a blade. Now, turn to charisma. Charisma is warmth made visible. It is a voice that makes hard things feel possible. It can gather a scattered room and give it courage to do good. The trouble begins when warmth outgrows accountability. Charisma then becomes a kind of credit. The leader spends that credit to bend process, to narrow counsel, to shorten time. People let it happen because affection feels safer than scrutiny. They trust the tone over the ledger. They trust the glow over the guardrails. Charisma thrives on stories. It frames the present as a hinge of history. It sketches enemies in clean outlines. It promises relief if only the room will move together. Right now, without the drag of disagreement. Charisma needs an audience to stay bright, so it rewards those who mirror it. Those who applaud are invited onto the stage. Those who ask hard questions are thanked and moved out of the light. In the short run, brightness wins. In the long run, the room runs out of air. Charisma also has a pose. It wears urgency. It borrows the language of care. "I ache for you," it says, "so let me carry the weight." Then it carries the rule past the normal checkpoints. It calls the checkpoints red tape. It calls the forms faithless. It calls dissent unloving. The followers exhale. They feel seen. They feel led. They do not notice that the leader has stopped answering to anything but applause and fear. Now the third cog, closed circuits. This is the information loop that feeds certainty and protects charisma. It narrows inputs. It privileges insiders. It labels outside sources as hostile. It makes the group the only trusted witness to itself. Closed circuits grow from fear, but they also grow from laziness. It is easier to hear the same story in the same tone than to weigh the weight of a contrary account. The loop simplifies life. The price is truth. Closed circuits have doors. Some are literal. Meetings marked leaders only. Hearings where the accused cannot bring a friend. Rooms where minutes are not kept. Some are social, shaming those who read other sources, mocking the vocabulary of people who study the same facts differently, quoting sacred texts as if the quote itself abolishes history and language. Some are technological. Channels that forward only stories that confirm the plan. Scrolls that never reach a dissenting voice. The loop begins to sound like the whole world. It is only a hallway with mirrors. Put the three together and watch the machine run. Certainty supplies the blade. Charisma supplies the speed. Closed circuits supply the fuel. Now add scarcity and shame. Scarcity tells the room that there is not enough time, money, or patience to hold nuance. Shame tells the leaders that admitting error would disgrace their predecessors and feed an enemy. In that weather, the three cogs hum. They make the staircase we saw in P2 rise by itself. You can hear the hum in certain phrases. We must protect our children. We must guard the flock. We cannot allow wolves in our midst. Protection, guarding, caution, these are good words. They deserve to be said. But when they are said without room for questions, they become passwords. Passwords open doors to rooms where evidence grows thin and outcomes grow thick. The password does not prove the danger. It only proves membership. Notice what happens to evidence once the engine spins. Thresholds fall. I heard becomes we know. Someone said becomes people are saying. Reputation becomes proof. Confession becomes the prize that makes a file feel complete. The room trims facts to fit a template. A neighbor who cannot answer quickly looks guilty. A woman who hesitates looks defiant. A child who echoes adult language looks credible. A quiet person looks cunning. The loop rewards the noise that confirms expectations. The loop also disciplines memory. It remembers harm done by outsiders in detail. It forgets harm done by insiders in a fog. It calls the first a warning and the second a misunderstanding. It trains the faithful to protect the tone more carefully than the truth. Over time, the community loses its skeptical elders. It keeps its enthusiastic young. It grows faster and thinner. Fast and thin can look holy on a poster. Fast and thin break easily when history knocks. What stops the machine? None of the three cogs are evil in themselves. Certainty can anchor courage. Charisma can pull people toward goodness. Communities need shared narratives to move it all. The problem is balance. Certainty must be yoked to humility. Charisma must be yoked to accountability. Story must be yoked to sources wider than the room. If any of those links break, the machine starts to eat the very faith it claims to guard. Consider how humility changes certainty. Humility says, here is what we believe, and here is what we do not know. It says, here is where the text is clear, and here is where wise people disagree. It says, here is the rule, and here is how it bends when a human face asks for context. Humility does not erase standards. It keeps standards from erasing people. It slows the blade to a tool. It allows repair. Consider how accountability changes charisma. Accountability extends the circle of counsel. It writes reasons. It publishes them. It rotates leadership. It invites critique without exile. It protects the leader from themselves. It protects the room from the moods of one voice. The leader remains warm. The process remains cool. Heat does its good work in the right place. The room breathes. Consider how openness changes circuits. Openness invites outside review. It asks for witnesses who do not owe their status to the current regime. It welcomes scholars who can read the past without flattery. It keeps minutes and shares them. It welcomes the press of a question that stings. It teaches members to test stories before they share them. It makes rumor feel embarrassing again. It is slow. It is healthy. When these counterweights fail, the machine cycles through stages with eerie predictability. First, alarms. Reports of invisible threats. A call to vigilance. Second, consolidation. A few voices take the mic. Procedures tighten. Third, acceleration. Hearings speed up. Evidence thresholds drop. Fourth, spectacle or secrecy, depending on the culture. Either punitive rituals in public or decisions behind closed doors with a smooth announcement after. Fifth, fatigue. People grow tired, but tiredness cannot speak without looking disloyal. Sixth, error. A case that even the faithful cannot stomach. Seventh, doubling down. The leaders say the error proves the danger is deeper than they thought. Eighth, fracture. Quiet exits, then louder ones. Ninth, reckoning. Sometimes, or else a long winter of forgetting. We should add one more element, imitation. The machine is contagious. Once one town or sect or court moves fast, A neighbor is tempted to match the pace. Leaders fear being called soft. They fear losing people to the strong story next door. They match tone for tone. The race is not toward truth. It is toward certainty performed louder, charisma projected brighter, circuits sealed tighter. Whoever stops to breathe looks weak. Whoever pauses to read looks late. It takes wisdom to refuse the race. And what of the faithful who stay? Many stay because they love. They love their families. They love their teachers. They love the practices that first taught them to sing and to forgive. Love makes them patient. But patience can be exploited. The machine learns to use loyalty as lubricant. It says, prove your love by trusting the process. It says, prove your faith by not asking for reasons. It says, prove your courage by acting now. In such a wind, the quietest virtues feel like vices. Listening, learning, waiting, these look like betrayal. They are not. They are the ways communities heal. If all this feels abstract, picture a room in winter. Outside, the roads are rutted with ice. Inside, a hearth smokes. The magistrates are tired. The ministers are worried. People are ill. Stores are thin. A child has a fit in the night and whispers a name she does not understand. A neighbor hears and repeats. A story grows teeth. The town wants a clean answer. The cogs are already oiled. Certainty speaks. Charisma points. The circuit closes. The first hearing is set for morning. Do not rush past that image. We will enter a room like it next. We will watch the speed of certainty, the warmth of charisma, the echo of a narrow circuit. We will see how a community that prized scripture and conscience came, for a winter, to trust the language of spectral harm more than the drag of careful proof. We will note that even then, some elders argued for restraint. We will see how the schedule outpaced them. There is a temptation to file that winter as a parable and nothing more. It is not only a parable, it is also paperwork, weather, sermons, and hunger. It is the machine and the map. It is the hinge creaking in public. It is neighbors doing harm under the banner of good. It is the cadence of held, brought, delivered, wearing a prayer's accent. It is the file that learned to stand where a person should have stood longer. We will not go to gawk. We will go to listen for the exact moment the blade replaced the boundary. We will listen for the sentences that announced themselves as care and arrived as compulsion. We will read lines in ledgers and lines in sermons and place them on the same table. We will ask how a village taught by humble texts learned, for a season, to trust hysteria over humility. And then we will ask how it ended, and who paid the bill. The three cogs do not vanish when the snow melts. They wait for new weather. They wait for new names. That is why we stare at them now, while the room is calm, while the air is ordinary, while the candle burns clean. We practice naming the parts so that, when fear comes, we can keep their proper speed. We do this not to sneer at ancestors, but to keep faith human in our own hands. The road ahead is a meeting house. The date is 1692. The files are thin at first and then grow fat. The words are familiar, the consequences are not. Bring a steady breath. Bring respect for the devout who tried to warn the room. Bring a willingness to learn from failure. The door opens. The engine hums. Shall we step inside and watch how a prayer became a procedure, and a procedure became a verdict? Snow lay in the cart tracks. Wood piles shrank. News from the frontier was bad. Families had fled war in the north and brought hunger and fear to the south. In Salem village, prayers grew tighter. Winter pressed on bodies and tempers. Then came the fits. A minister's household shook first. A child stiffened and cried. A niece echoed. Neighbors watched, helpless. A physician found no natural cause and said the phrase that turned a room, "The evil hand." It was a sentence shaped by belief. It gave the fear a name. Once named, fear learned the route to court. Names followed. An enslaved woman in the minister's home, Tituba. A homeless mother, Sarah Good. A land-disputed widow, Sarah Osborne. The pattern was not yet visible. The first examinations felt like a storm that would pass. But storms love paths. The meeting house became a courtroom. Scripture and complaint shared a table. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin led the questions. Their tone was urgent. Their questions leaned. Why do you hurt these children? It is a question that presumes an answer. The accused denied. The afflicted cried out. The room read cries as proof. The process gained speed. Spectral evidence entered. In that theology, a specter, the shape of a person, could appear by the devil's leave. Could the devil borrow a shape without consent? Ministers debated this even then. Some warned against trusting visions. Others hesitated to throw away what looked like signs. The return of several ministers, sent in May, urged caution. It did not close the door. Governor William Phipps created a special court in the spring, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, to hear and determine. It needed to show order. It needed to show speed. The court admitted the spectral. It admitted the touch test. It read strange cakes and muttered cures as signs of a dark pact. It sought confession to make the files feel complete. It found what it looked for, often. Depositions multiplied. Neighbors wrote what they had seen, also what they had heard, also what they feared. Local grievances wandered in with theology, property lines, church membership fights, past disputes with the minister. Historians do not agree on the weight of each factor. They do agree that stress, rumor, and rivalry had room to work once the threshold dropped. Rebecca Nurse stood in that room, old, respected, frail of hearing. At first, a jury found her not guilty. The afflicted cried out. The court reconsidered. One ambiguous remark, "She is one of us," or "one of us is," was read in the worst light. The verdict turned. The ledger gained a line. A woman years in mercy work became a name under sentence. This is how process, once driven, is hard to turn back. Giles Corey refused to plead. He knew that a plea fed a process he believed was wrong. The law allowed pressure to extract a plea. He died under that pressure. We need no detail here. The point is structure. A man stood still, and the machine demanded motion. When he would not move, it tried to move him. The record notes the attempt and the outcome. The record does not note the silence that followed in town kitchens. Numbers give the scale. By autumn, about 200 accused. Dozens imprisoned. 19 hanged. Others died in custody from sickness and want. One crushed for silence. These facts are heavy enough without adornment. The years after tried to reckon with the weight. They never balanced the page. Clergy argued at the edge of the storm. In Crease, Mather wrote against trusting testimony that could be only dreams. It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. Cotton Mather, his son, weighed in often and is quoted often. His words are still contested for tone and influence. What is clear is this: some voices counseled caution. Caution came late. The governor dissolved the court in October. A new court convened that winter. It set aside spectral evidence. Many were released. Executions stopped. In 1697, the colony called a day of fasting and prayer. Some jurors signed confessions of error. A minister asked pardon. Years later, one of the accusers, now grown, begged forgiveness for her part. Restitution was granted to some families. Names were cleared in law. Names do not heal as quickly in memory. Why did it happen here then? Historians resist single answers. Some point to war trauma, some to cold and want, some to village faction, some to parish politics and a minister's hard preaching, some to the psychology of girls gaining sudden power in a strict world. A few to poisons in bread. Most now doubt that path. The safest truth is a weave. Theology supplied categories. Stress supplied urgency. Procedure supplied speed. Charisma, on bench and bench front, supplied a voice. The closed circuit supplied applause. Spectral evidence deserves a pause. It is the most famous feature because it should have been the shortest lived. It asked a court to trust what only one person could see. It turned dreams into proof. It treated waking pains as the legal presence of a neighbor's spirit. It took a pastoral crisis, children in torment, and translated it into a file. Files are blunt. They flatten rooms. They make haste look like care. Process taught witnesses what to say. It rewarded the grammar that the court could file. It made children fluent in cues adults favored. It taught the accused that silence would be read as malice. It taught the community to call dissent danger. The longer the court sat, the more its certainty felt like reality. The engine from P3 hummed in public. It used new words. It kept the same rhythm. You can see how easily piety helped. People came to examinations with psalms. They prayed while others spoke. Ministers urged repentance for the soul's sake. Confessions, once made, broke the accused line by line into the shapes the court expected. Those who confessed and implicated others often lived. Those who stood on silence often did not. A survival logic grew that had nothing to do with truth. It had everything to do with procedure. The cruelty here was not only a rope or a stone, it was a calendar. It was a speed. It was the ease with which a threshold fell. It was the near holiness given to a form signed at dusk. The language of law and the language of faith overlapped until a neighbor's doubt looked like the devil's craft. In that overlap, decent people lost their caution. In that overlap, the guardrails of earlier years lay flat. There were breaks. Some judges slowed. Some juries balked. Some ministers pled for restraint. Governor Phipps stepped back when the storm grew too wide and his own household was touched. Caution returned when elites felt the cost. It is not a noble reason. It is, at least, a reason that worked. The lesson is not cynicism. It is the hard truth that power must feel what it defends before it defends it well. After the storm, language changed. Spectral testimony was discredited in law. Later courts demanded material proof. Manuals revised phrases. Sermons learned to warn against panic. Yet the memory stayed. It made New England careful about some things and not about others. It made descendants argue for centuries over blame, excuse, and meaning. It left a map of how fast fear can wear holy clothes. We hold this map carefully. We respect the dead. We respect the devout who argued for patience when it was costly. We repeat the line about 10 escaping rather than 1 condemned. We add a line for the living. Better a slow answer than a swift mistake that will take years to amend. The slow answer is not weakness. It is respect for the person in front of you. Stand at the meeting house door again. Inside, the benches. The Bible open on the table. The magistrates' chairs. The clerk's quill. Outside, a road rutted by winter and war. A village that wanted safety. A theology that wanted purity. A process that offered both at a price it hid. The price was a neighbor. The price was time. The price was faith's own reputation. We leave this room with our ears tuned. Certainty can still speak in that tone. Charisma can still warm that fast. Circuits can still narrow this tight. Next, we step to a city where prophecy took the mayor's seat. Another century, another language. The same questions. How does a vision become a law? How does hunger become proof? How does a city under siege teach itself that mercy can wait? Winter loosened its grip on the flat fields of Westphalia. Carts rattled through ruts. Church bells shared air with market cries. In Munster, a reforming town with old walls and new sermons, prophecy came to live in ordinary rooms. It did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as declarations read aloud, as names entered in ledgers, as keys turned on orders signed with scripture. The town was already restless. Preachers like Bernhard Rothman had carried the Reformation into parish pulpits. Images came down. New hymns went up. Printing pressed arguments into hands that once only heard them. Then, from the Melchiorite circle, Jan Mathis arrived with a message of the end. Münster, he said, would be the new Jerusalem. People hungry for certainty heard a timetable in his voice. People wounded by war and taxes heard a harbor. Baptism is where it turned. Adult baptism, once a dissenting conscience, became a line in the street. Crowds stepped into water with relief that looked like courage. Magistrates hesitated, then yielded. The town council, feeling the ground slide, tried to hold order with fines and admonitions. It was not enough. The mood had shifted. The sound in the square had changed from argument to proclamation. Rothman stayed central, but Mathis and his lieutenant Jan of Leiden pulled the center tight. The message hardened. Prophecy became program. The old council gave way to a new structure, 12 elders styled after Israel's tribes. Titles changed. Seals changed. The city swore an oath to the word as the town now read it. Those who refused rebaptism were told to leave. Many did, under guard. Others stayed and kept quiet. A city does not convert at once. It is made to. That making took paper. Edicts followed each other as if they were steps on a ladder. Property was made common, in principle and in practice, first in rhetoric, then in rooms where inventories were taken and stores centralized. Rationing began under the language of justice. Food was counted, tools were counted. Those who hoarded were named. The poor felt seen. The rich felt accused. The new order promised no one would lack. The new order also decided who deserved bread. The Prince Bishop, Franz von Waldeck, answered with a ring of men. Earthworks rose. Roads were watched. The air learned the whistle of shot. The siege began before the dust of reform had settled. Scarcity moved in and set the table. Inside, the elders tightened rules. Curfews, watches, work brigades, daily preaching, lists for everything that moved and everything that could be melted into coin or plate. Scriptures were cited beside each duty. The book became a municipal code. Easter of 1534 gave the story its hinge. Mathis, reading a sign in the calendar and the sky, led a sortie with a small band. He did not return. The effect was mathematical. A leader subtracted, another added. Jan of Leiden took the chair, then the throne. The language of king entered minutes and mouths. He wore a crown in a city under siege. He called himself servant and sovereign in the same breath. He moved with a dancer's confidence and a clerk's attention to form. Under him, the order became an order. Proclamations multiplied. New seals stamped wax. A court sat that quoted law and revelation in the same sentences. Visitors were screened. Work was assigned. Marriages were reorganized. Polygamy appeared partly justified by siege demographics, partly by a prophetic reading that made old stories new rules. Hostile chronicles give numbers and lurid detail. Sober historians quarrel about emphasis and motive. What is not in dispute is the administrative fact. Registers were kept, unions were recorded, enforcement was real. One wife who defied the order met a court's cold severity. The record does not need gore to show the chill. Daily life bent to the siege and to scripture. Cloister gardens were dug for food. Bells marked labor as well as prayer. Songs filled gaps that hunger left. Guards signaled along the walls. Children grew used to a city where the line between worship and watch changed with the hour. Inside the halls, coin and plate were weighed and turned into pay and powder. Outside the walls, the Prince Bishop waited, filed reports, and tightened the cord. Iconoclasm, which had begun earlier, continued as policy. Statues that once taught the illiterate were now counted as snares. Windows went dark, altars went plain. The cleared spaces felt pure to some and empty to others. The city's look changed fast, faster than feelings can, but feelings were not the measure. Decrees were. Information closed into a loop. Letters in and out were controlled. Confession of doubt became disloyalty. Outsiders were painted as wolves. Inside voices that warned of haste were thanked in public and ignored in council. The 12 elders learned the art of unanimity. The writing hand grew brisk. The hearing ear grew thin. Certainty had speed. Charisma had a stage. The circuit had no easy doors. Not everything inside was bleak. Mutual aid had honest moments. Widows were fed. Crafts were reorganized to keep hands busy and minds steady. The poor were named brothers and sisters instead of burdens. The promise of a city where no child begged lit faces for a time. It is important to say this. Falsehood does not hold rooms together so long without threads of good, but good warped under pressure. Scarcity and zeal pulled at it until the weave tightened into a net. The siege wore on. Winter returned with less wood to burn. Rations shrank. Punishments grew sharper because leaders feared slack more than cruelty. The king danced in the square to keep hearts high. He judged in the hall to keep order stiff. He dressed the poor from storerooms taken from the rich. He spoke as father, prophet, and mayor. He heard applause until he heard only applause. Charisma, without a break, learns its own echo. Beyond the walls, negotiations rose and fell. The imperial and episcopal forces argued terms, supplies, and timing. Some in the encampments wanted a storming for honor. Others preferred hunger to do the work. A spy worked a gate. A rumor ran along a ditch. In June 1535, the waiting ended. The walls were breached by stratagem and forced together. The city fell. The leaders were taken. The files closed on sentences written elsewhere. What followed has been told in tones we will not use. The bodies of the 3 chief men were displayed in the years after as warnings in iron cages high on a church. The cages still hang. They tell a story about power remembering its victory. They also tell a quieter story about how long a city can live with its ghosts. Memory is a second siege. It keeps watch when armies go home. How did prophecy become municipal code so quickly? Scarcity and schedule helped. So did the thrill of a clean map in a messy world. So did leaders who blurred devotion with direction. So did a populace that had learned, in one generation, that orders can change if a preacher reads a text with a new voice. The elders tightened process because they feared drift. The bishop tightened the ring because he feared contagion. Each side called the other chaos. Each side used files. The Munster episode is not a cartoon. It is not only fanaticism and repression. It is also hope bent into rules. It is also poor men and women wagering their lives on a promise that the last would be first and that their children would grow without hunger or fear. It is also the moment when rules, meant to protect a fragile good, began to protect themselves. We honor the faithful who fed neighbors inside those walls. We warn against the speed that made dissent treason and treason anything inconvenient. There are lessons that still help. Plural leadership can slow a crown made in a day. Outside review can cool a court that quotes heaven. Open channels can keep a city from mistaking its echo for the world. Calendars with built-in pauses can make zeal breathe. These are dull tools. They are the right tools for volatile hours. Munster did not have enough of them. Its hinge swung fast. Stand in the gatehouse in your mind. Hear the page read. An ordinance on bread, a proclamation on marriage, a ban on a book, a summons to work. See a clerk's hand steady because numbers steady hands. See a guard's hand steady because fear steady hands. See a mother steady a child. See a child look past her at a king who dances and a bishop who waits. The city is a lesson written in ordinary gestures. Prophecy became a plan. The plan became a diet. The diet became a discipline. The discipline became a verdict. We leave the walls by the same stairs the guard climbed 100 times. The fields outside are not special. They look like any fields in hard weather. The lesson travels well because it is not tied to stone. It is tied to a habit of turning visions into rules faster than hearts can keep up. When that happens, a holy word becomes a municipal clause, and the clause forgets the face that word was meant to bless. From this city under prophecy, we turn toward a continent under a banner. We trade walls for frontiers, elders for armies, a throne and a market for a heavenly kingdom that promised to reorder all things. The map is larger. The machinery is familiar. Scarcity, certainty, and closed circuits will ride again. If a single town can be remade in a winter, what happens when millions are told that the New Jerusalem has already begun? A failed exam, a fever dream, Books given by strangers. A vision that turned a village convert into a man with a mandate. Hong Xiu Quan called himself the younger brother of Jesus. He gathered the God worshippers in the hills of Guangxi. Hymns replaced temple chants. Idols burned, rules multiplied. A private revelation began to speak in public orders. Rebellion started small and moved fast. In 1851, the Jintian uprising lit its first fuse. Banners rose with characters for Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. Soldiers joined. Farmers joined. Dispossessed men with nothing to lose joined. Women joined as well, in segregated ranks that shocked observers trained to forget women's labor. The march took rivers like roads. By 1853, the movement reached Nanjing. The city fell. It was renamed Tianjin, the heavenly capital. A new state wrote itself into being. States announced themselves with paper. The Taiping did so with edicts that sounded like sermons and schedules that felt like liturgy. Alcohol, opium, gambling, and foot-binding were banned. Hair queues, symbols of the Qing, were rejected, earning the rebels their nickname in imperial files, long hairs. Property was declared the Lord's. The land system of the heavenly kingdom promised equal fields by household. Officials counted grain and family members. Registers multiplied. Heaven required a ledger. Prayer framed each day. New texts, adaptations, and inventions were copied and taught. Commandments were recited as law, and law was recited as praise. Men and women were housed by rule. Markets moved under watch. Work details were posted by hour. The heavenly capital learned a clock that rang with worship and with war. Zeal wrote the order. Scarcity filled in the lines. The Qing fought back with a patchwork of banner troops and newly raised local armies. Zheng Guofan's Xiang army rose on loyalty and rice taxes. Li Hongzhang followed with the Huai army. Foreigners entered on the margins where trade faced trouble. Frederick Townsend Ward drilled mercenaries into an ever-victorious army. After his death, Charles Chinese Gordon took command. On maps, the Yangtze looked like a spine. Along it, towns lit and went dark. Siege became a season. Inside Tianjin, hierarchy hardened. Hong Xiu Quan took the title, Heavenly King. Beneath him, kings by direction and wing, east, west, north, south. And later the Wing King ruled provinces of policy. Administration thickened. Courts spoke scripture and decree together. Inspections policed morals and markets. Rations were counted with piety and fear. A city at worship became a city at war, then a city at siege. Internal storms broke the line. In 1856 came the Tianjin incident, a purge among leaders after power disputes crested. We need no detail here. The point is structure. When a movement builds on prophecy and personal grace, succession becomes a doctrine written in the air. The ledger cannot hold it. The file cannot cool it. The city survived, but thinner. The armies outside noted the crack. Not all within was darkness. The Taiping banned practices that hurt the weak. They punished extortion. They taught reading. They raised women above certain customs that had kept them small. They promised that poor children would eat. In some districts, for a time, they did. Threads of good run through the fabric. They always do. Under pressure, threads pull tight. Tight cloth can keep out cold. It can also bind. Casualty numbers remain contested. The scale is not. Famine, flight, disease, and battle emptied counties. Some regions never recovered their people in a generation. Historians argue about percentages and totals, about whether the war or the policies or the weather did the most harm. They agree that total war, once learned, writes itself into every corner of life. A hymn becomes a march. A pledge becomes a ration. A ration becomes a sentence pronounced by a hungry clerk at dusk. Administration is where ideals show their cost. The land system, in principle, promised justice. In practice, it needed surveyors, records, seasons without war, and men who could tell a quarrel from a plot. War ate the surveyors. Records burned. Men mistook haste for zeal. The promise stayed on paper while the kitchen ran short. In the gap between promise and bowl, anger grows. Anger looks for traitors because hunger needs a reason. Language in Tianjin narrowed as the ring tightened. Letters out were screened. Letters in were suspect. Preachers learned which verses steadied the room and which raised questions no one wanted to hear. The heavenly king withdrew into heightened devotions and periods of seclusion that admirers called holy and critics called absence. Charisma turned into distance. Distance turned into a court that hurt itself. The Qing learned as the war dragged on. They borrowed tactics that worked and funds that moved. They paid local loyalties and allowed space for talented men to rise by results. They couched their cause in language of stability and heaven's mandate restored. The bureaucracy that the Taiping despised became the tool that wore them down, not through brilliance alone, but through persistence, paper, and food. Nanjing's end came in 1864 after long encirclement. The story has been told often. We will not repeat the dramatic parts. The city fell. The heavenly capital became a caution. The heavenly king died before the final breach. His son, the young monarch, was captured. The cages this time were not iron and public. They were lines in files that wrote names out of the future. Survivors vanished into registers as prisoners, resettled households, or quiet returns. Heaven retreated from the minutes. What remains is a map of how mass faith can fuel a state that moves faster than it can think. The Taiping drew on scripture to restrain vice and to mobilize the poor. They also used it to flatten difference and to speed obedience. Their ranks included people weary of corruption, people driven by famine, people thrilled by a promise that spoke their names. They built schools and sang. They also built courts that quoted Revelation and closed cases with little air. Both are true. The weave will not let us separate threads cleanly. Foreign observers wrote their own myths. Some missionaries saw hope, others saw heresy. Some merchants saw danger to trade, others saw room for bargains. Later writers turned the Taiping into symbols to fit their century's fights. Proto-revolutionaries in one book, deluded sectarians in another. Reality resists poster work. It feels like a ledger marked paid and a ledger marked owed stacked together. It feels like a kitchen with less rice and a barracks with more men. What do we learn for our hinge? Zeal can feed the hungry and still starve a city of air. Bans can protect the weak and still become a whip when shouted at scale. A ruler who prays can also love applause. A bureaucracy that keeps order can also grind faces if it forgets why bread matters. Guardrails matter most when the cause is holy. Plural leadership slows a throne made from a vision. Outside review cools a court that quotes heaven. Open channels keep a city from mistaking its echo for the world. There is another lesson in the quiet after. After total war, piety itself sounds like a drum. People who survive do not always trust big words again. They trust bowls and roofs and calendars that keep their promises. The state and the temple, chastened, learn to speak softly or risk waking a memory that still watches the door. Memory is a second ring around a city. It holds even when the armies go home. We began with a fever that became a file. We end with a file that outlived the fever. The Taiping promised peace and learned procedure that moved like a sword. The Qing promised order and learned improvisation that sometimes looked like mercy and sometimes like endurance dressed as virtue. Millions stood between both. Their stories make our caution stiffen. The scale here was continental. The next rooms are small. We go from armies to communes, from capitals to compounds, from rivers that carry fleets to rented rooms with blinds drawn. The machinery is the same, only closer. How do isolation, loyalty tests, and apocalyptic clocks turn care into closure when the exit is a single door and the voice is a single man? Begin with care. These are recent rooms. Families still hold photographs. Names are still set at tables. We speak of structures, not monsters. We speak to protect the living. The People's Temple began in hope. Jim Jones preached integration when it was not cheap. He ran clinics, food lines, and buses. He adopted children. He called his work apostolic and socialist in one breath. Many joined for justice. Many stayed for community. A church became a movement. A movement became a machine. The machine learned isolation. First by distance, Indiana to California, then to Guyana, then by habit letters screened, phones monitored, trips denied. The jungle around Jonestown amplified the policy inside. Miles of trees became a policy of no exit. Shortwave radios carried the voice of one man farther than roads could. News came in curated pieces. News went out, edited or not at all. Loyalty was measured in hours and phrases. Long meetings called white nights. Drills that blurred practice and crisis. Public confessions framed as healing. Private doubts read as betrayal. The vocabulary turned. Concern became counter-revolution. Safety became stay. Family meant the group more than the kin that waited in another country. Charity remained. So did the clinic. So did the band. But charity now served a circle that did not allow fresh air. Pressure rose. Defectors left with stories. Reporters wrote. Relatives begged. A congressman flew to sea. Files grew thick, far from the jungle. In Guyana, a delegation came. Events spun. We need no detail here. We can say the outcome. A community closed every exit. Many died. The wound still moves through families today. Heaven's Gate took another road to the same cliff. Two leaders in the 1970s, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, sought a path to the next level. They read scripture and science fiction together. They called themselves T and Doe, then simply the class. They asked for discipline, no sex, no families, no personal names. They asked for uniformity, clothes, hair, diet, speech. They asked for separation jobs that kept them together, homes that kept outsiders out. They replaced outside language with their own. The clock ticked for years. Timelines shifted. The group adjusted. Bonnie Nettles died in 1985. The theology bent to fit that loss, moving ascent from body to spirit in staged ideas the members learned to hold. The circle grew smaller and tighter. Recruitment fell. Rules rose. The internet arrived. The group used it to fund itself with web work and to publish their message. Contact was controlled. Descent was gentler than in Jonestown, but exit still cost everything that made one's days make sense. In 1997, a comet crossed the sky. Hale-Bopp was a shared fact. The group read it as a sign. Videos were recorded. Members spoke calmly about an exit. They wore matched clothes as a vow of unity. Outsiders watched later and argued about tone. It is safer to say this. They had rehearsed trust so long that an ending framed as promotion felt like care. The bridge they walked had been built plank by plank over 2 decades. When they reached the end, many stepped off together. Again, we need no detail, only the awful summary. Many died. Families still grieve. What tied these very different rooms? Isolation that felt like safety, loyalty tests that felt like love, clocks that felt like purpose, a leader's voice that felt like home. Each of these can be good in small doses. Together, under fear, they remove air. They move decent people past warning signs because every warning has already been named as the enemy. Notice the mechanics. Information narrowed. Outside review disappeared. The same faces set the schedule and wrote the minutes. Words shifted their weights. Sacrifice came to mean silence your doubts. Unity came to mean agree now. Enemy came to mean the person asking you to slow down. In one case, the perimeter was jungle. In the other, it was leased walls and long blinds. Either way, the map shrank to the size of a room. Both groups did real good for real people along the way. That matters. Meals were served. Illness was tended. Loneliness for many was cured. These truths explain why the warning felt rude. The warning often comes from outside and does not see the soup line or the laughter at night. Inside, the laughter felt like proof. Beware of any proof that cannot survive a question. Guardrails that might have helped. Plural leadership that cannot be replaced by charisma. Outside ombuds with authority to interview, unannounced, and to publish reasons. Calendars that force rest and visiting days. Open mail, unmonitored phone calls. A plain rule. No doctrine that cannot be explained face-to-face to a skeptic without threat. These are dull. They are life. The endgames taught hard lessons. In Jonestown, the language of siege normalized irreversible orders. In Heaven's Gate, the language of transcendence normalized an irreversible exit. Neither needed brutality in every hour to get there. They needed a long discipline of reframing loss as proof of progress. They needed good intentions without breaks. They needed closed loops that misnamed care. We refuse mockery. People joined for justice, meaning, family, peace. Many were brave. Many were kind. Structures failed them. Structures taught them to treat caution as treason. Structures rewarded the sentences that made the file look complete. Structures cost them air. We carry forward 2 cautions. First, if a leader asks you to love them more than your oldest friends, slow down. Second, if a group asks you to hate those who ask for time, slow down again. Truth is patient. Health is porous. Love has room for a phone call. The bridge ahead widens. We step back from names and look at weather. Scarcity, shame, siege mentalities. These conditions feed the 3 cogs we named before. They speed the hour. They thin the air. If we can name the weather, we can learn when to bring umbrellas, when to call the meeting off, and when to open a window, even if the paper says it must stay shut. Begin with weather. Not the sky, but the air a community breathes. Scarcity dries it. Shame chills it. A siege, real or imagined, makes it thin. In such air, decent people hurry. They choose clean lines over careful hands. The 3 cogs we named certainty, charisma, closed circuits turn faster here. They feel like help. They feel like home. They are only speed. Scarcity comes first because it touches the bowl. Grain fails. Wages fall. War takes cart horses and sons. A plague cancels markets. Or the scarcity is bureaucratic. Too few judges, too many cases, not enough time to sit with a story until it makes sense. Scarcity makes every exception look like theft. It turns patience into a luxury word. Leaders begin to ask what can be done today. By noon, with the tools at hand. The tools at hand are forms. Scarcity moralizes. A family that has bread is asked to prove they deserve it. A widow who gets leniency is suspected of knowing someone. A stranger who speaks slowly is accused of wasting time. We cannot feed everyone, a council says, so we must feed the faithful first. Faithfulness is measured by compliance because compliance is countable. The ledger writes this as prudence. A child hears it as hunger. Time scarcity sharpens the edge. Calendars become weapons. Deadlines acquire halos. We will revisit this after the crisis, leaders say, and the crisis renews itself at dawn. An anxious schedule hides in pious clothing. The fast becomes a purge. The vigil becomes a hearing. The meeting becomes a verdict made to meet the bell. Now shame. Shame is a glue in tight communities. It keeps neighbors honest. It also keeps them quiet. When the room prizes spotless reputation over repair, dissent feels dirty. A mother who asks for process is told she has brought scandal to the house of God. A deacon who wants outside counsel is told he has insulted the elders. Leaders who fear losing face learn to prefer being wrong together to being corrected in public. The file thickens. Conscience thins. Shame also rewrites apologies. It changes "I am sorry" into "I will perform sorrow until you stop looking." It makes confession a stage. It teaches the accused to speak the right phrases in the right order. It teaches the room to applaud the performance and to distrust the unscripted voice. Forgiveness is no longer repair. It is compliance with tone. People learn to hide pain because naming harm endangers belonging. The wound grows under clean bandages. Shame loves clarity. It arranges the seats so that the penitent faces the group. It assigns a sponsor, a scribe, a prayer, and a deadline. These elements can heal when used gently and with consent. Under pressure, they become a funnel. The room feels righteous because it has created a scene where grace is visible. The person feels smaller because complexity has been trimmed to fit a rite. The rite reproduces itself because it is easy to schedule. Then siege. A siege is not only walls and ladders. It is a mood. "We are surrounded" is a sentence that allocates power. It narrows horizons and enlarges authority. It explains losses and demands loyalty. It turns critics into liabilities and outsiders into wolves. Under siege, the room asks for uniforms, badges, lists. It asks for messages to be cleared before they are spoken. It redefines caution as collaboration with the enemy. The map shrinks to a hallway. Sometimes the siege is literal. Munster, Jonestown, Nanjing under encirclement. Sometimes it is a frontier at war, as in New England, when Salem feared raids and rumor more than it trusted delay. Sometimes it is cultural, a community convinced that the city, the papers, and the neighbors hate what it loves. In each case, the pattern is the same. Borders harden, humor dries up, meetings lose their tea. Siege speeds the cogs. Certainty offers a blade and calls it a boundary. We cannot afford nuance while arrows fly. Charisma offers a rallying point. "Stay with me, I will carry the weight." Closed circuits offer shelter. Only we can be trusted with the truth. Each offer sounds pastoral. Each becomes pressure when it replaces ordinary air. A healthy community can move in and out of crisis. An unhealthy one decides to live there. Scarcity and siege feed each other. Hunger makes rumors walk. A rumor makes the ration smaller. The smaller ration makes a dissenting voice sound greedy. Greed is punished to reassure the nervous crowd. The punishment becomes a story that enforces the next ration. Round and round, a winter that uses the language of summer while cutting the fruit trees down. Shame helps the wheel keep turning. It explains why no one stands up to stop it. Who wants to be the one accused of weakening the line? Who wants to be the mother who undermined discipline to help her hungry child? Who wants to be the clerk who writes delay for inquiry in a season when delay is called dereliction? The room's vocabulary makes virtue sound like treason until the only safe courage is to clap on time. Watch how evidence changes in this air. Standards drop because the cost of missing a threat is framed as apocalypse. "Better to err on the side of safety," says the chair, and safety is defined as speed. Hearsay enters as community knowledge. Signs become proof. Symptoms become verdicts. The extraordinary is admitted because ordinary hours are gone. Even those who know better nod, because to object would be to explain, and explaining takes time, and time is scarce. The past joins the siege. Old injuries ride forward, disguised as vigilance. A property line dispute becomes evidence of secret malice. An old sermon becomes a weapon in a new scandal. Families who were slighted a decade ago smile without their eyes and let the machine choose targets. The file does not see the old story under the new. The file is blind to sediments. It records only surfaces. Add fatigue. Exhaustion is a condition too. Tired people cannot process complexity. They default to scripts. They accept the first clean story that comes through the door. Meetings extend into the night when minds are dullest and social pressure is strongest. Votes are called on the third hour because the chair must keep us on schedule. A community that needs sleep calls its weariness devotion. Weariness cannot tell the difference between truth and tone. We should say how good intentions survive in such air. They do, for a time. People still bring soup. Couples still hold hands in the back row. Children still draw pictures at the edge of meetings. A chaplain still says, "Be gentle," and a few hearts listen. The light does not go out, it flickers. The lesson here is not despair, but urgency for guardrails while light remains. There are counter-weathers. Abundance is one, even in small forms. A pantry funded quietly so the poor do not have to perform. A clinic where care is not contingent on belief. A budget line for appeals, laughter after meetings. A Sabbath that holds like a levee and forbids decisions made in adrenaline. These dull mercies keep scarcity from preaching. Honor cultures can be redeemed by remorse cultures. Leadership that makes a habit of public admission, I was wrong, here is why, here is what we will do, cools shame into humility. Practices that move confession back into private rooms with consent and care prevent the stage from teaching the wrong lesson. Teaching children to ask why and to change their minds trains a future that treats correction as craft, not humiliation. Siege mentalities are hardest. They require doors. Real doors. Independent voices with keys to rooms. Ombuds who can arrive unannounced and publish reasons. Partnerships across borders that are not broken by panic. The discipline to refuse the language of war for cases that are not war. The older the scar, the more stubborn this work will be. It is still work that can be done. Case by case, we can see the weather's signature. In Salem, winter and frontier, fear made spectral claims feel legible to law. In Munster, encirclement turned prophecy into ordinance with a speed only siege can excuse. In the Taiping capital, famine and total war widened decrees until the city ran on rations of rice and breath. In Jonestown, literal distance amplified a policy of isolation into a geography without exits. In Heaven's Gate, a long discipline of separation created a world where a comet could be read as a door. Different centuries. Same air. A last word about stories. Scarcity prefers simple plots. Shame prefers tidy endings. Siege prefers heroes and enemies. None of these genres are good at human truth. Human truth needs room for the person who did not sleep last night, for the widow who cannot answer quickly, for the elder who is brave and wrong in the same hour. If your story cannot carry those figures without calling them traitors, the weather has already chosen your script. So what do we do when the wind rises? We write reasons. We slow clocks. We refuse to decide after midnight. We publish the standards before the case arrives. We keep a line in the budget for mercy that takes time. We hang a sign that says, doubt may remain. We teach that boundaries exist to protect people, not ideas. We agree that any rule that breaks a person must be examined again. We memorize one sentence. If the weak always pay, the policy is a weapon. From weather, we will step to practices. Rituals meant for care can turn punitive when these conditions blow. Exorcisms, ordeals, public penance, restoration scripts, each can heal when held gently. Each can harm when scheduled for speed and performed for show. We will read the paperwork attached to them. We will name the guardrails that worked and why. And we will keep the air moving while we read. Begin with a hand on a shoulder, a blessing, a prayer for peace, a visit after loss. This is where care lives. It is soft, local, ordinary. It keeps neighbors from falling through the floor. But care has forms. Forms have power. Under pressure, a form can outgrow the face it serves. That is the hinge where care learns to compel. Rituals turn first. Exorcisms meant to comfort the terrified become contests that must produce a sign. The room leans forward. The healer feels watched. The language grows louder. The trouble is no longer the person's fear. It is whether the ritual will satisfy a schedule. Even when nothing violent happens, dignity leaks out. A life becomes a stage. The stage demands repetition until it works. Public penance changes shape next. A discipline once meant to repair trust becomes a spectacle to protect reputation. A confession that belongs in a quiet room is moved to a microphone. The script grows standard. The tears are timed. The audience is told that grace has won because the words landed in the proper order. What is repaired is the feeling in the room. What is not repaired is the person. When they falter later, the audience calls it betrayal. It is only a wound under a bandage. Restoration programs can follow. They set timelines and benchmarks. They assign sponsors who must report. They require phrases in exchange for status. None of this is wrong in itself. Structure helps, but structure without consent and exit is pressure in liturgical clothing. A person is made to act whole before they are safe. The program moves to its next success. The person learns to speak for survival. Ordeals, in older centuries, show the same drift. Hot iron and cold water were never only about proof. They were communal rituals that turned fear into a yes or a no. When that world gave way to inquiry, the tendency did not disappear. It migrated. The new ordeal became the deposition repeated until it matched the template. The new heat became hours of questions. A miracle was no longer asked from the water. It was asked from a mouth. Either way, the ritual asked the person to carry the room's anxiety. Shunning and exclusion do a quieter harm. They are framed as care for the flock. They call themselves boundaries. They sometimes save lives when a person is dangerous. They do not save the truth when a person only asks for time. Applied lazily, shunning removes the mirror that a community needs. It tells the story that dissent is contagion. It is not. Dissent is a test that a healthy room can pass. We have seen the conditions that speed these turns: scarcity, shame, siege. Add a fourth: success. When a ministry grows fast, stories become currency. The urge to show impact makes care into a report. Reports ask for numbers. Numbers ask for standards. Standards ask for compliance. Compliance asks for silence. The very good a community does can teach it the wrong lessons about speed. Guardrails exist. Some are old, some are new. They work because they are dull. First, plural leadership. No single voice should control diagnosis, ritual, and discipline. Rotating roles break the echo. Shared authority makes it easier to say, "not yet." In some polities, this looked like councils, with mixed votes, clergy and laity together, so that professional anxiety could not stampede the room. In others, it looked like elders drawn from different families and trades. Variety slows panic. It also spreads wisdom. Second, declared standards before the case. Write, publish, and teach what counts as evidence. Require material corroboration where possible. Forbid the extraordinary unless the ordinary has been exhausted. In colonial New England, withdrawing spectral signs from court reset thresholds and saved lives. In later centuries, habeas corpus and reasons in writing kept bodies from vanishing into schedules. The principle holds across eras. If a rule can move a person, it must carry reasons that can be read, not only felt. Third, outside review with teeth, ombuds, visitors, inspectors who are not chosen by the current circle. Their presence protects the faithful and the leaders alike. They bring air. They publish reasons. They make it possible to say, "We were mistaken," without destroying face. When a bishop's court had to keep minutes that a royal court could request, some corners stayed brighter. Where monasteries invited external visitation, small abuses could be corrected before they became habits. Fourth, consent and privacy in pastoral care. Confession and counseling require freedom to leave, freedom to pause, and protection from performance. No microphones, no cameras, no required scripts, chaperones when needed for safety, but silence otherwise. Written notes that belong to the penitent, not to the platform. A simple test. If the room benefits more than the person, stop. Fifth, slow clocks. Calendars that forbid midnight verdicts. Rules that require 2 meetings with sleep between them. Sabbaths that hold like levies against adrenaline. In Salem, when the schedule finally slowed and the court changed, the storm lost oxygen. In other places, discipline committees that met only after rest saved reputations from being burned by haste. Slowness is mercy's technology. Sixth, the right to doubt without exile. Put it in writing. Teach it from the start. Make room for "I don't know" during teaching and ritual. Let questions appear in the minutes without labels. Communities that name doubt as a friend are hard to stampede. They still act. They act with eyes open. Seventh, restitution and repair as goals, not performance. When harm is found, the aim is safety and repair. not spectacle. This means budgets, therapy for victims, time paid for leaders who must step back, meals delivered without fanfare. It means anonymity where protection requires it. It means that a restored leader returns, if ever, to a different seat. It means that the community learns to live without the voice it once loved. That is a hard lesson. It is freedom. Eighth, teach genre. Sacred texts speak in law, poetry, proverb, vision, letter. Confusion of genres breeds coercion. Read law as law and poem as poem. Read vision with patience. Teach the history of translation. Teach the limits of certainty. Teach the difference between a boundary that protects and a blade that punishes confusion. Communities that read well harm less. Ninth, keep records that can be read by someone not in the room. Minutes with plain language. Votes with counts. Reasons with sources. Logs of who was present and who recused. Strong privacy around individuals. Strong transparency around process. Bad actors fear paper. Good actors are protected by it. Paper that only the inner circle sees is not paper. It is power. 10th, practice apology. Not as ritual, but as skill. Leaders should rehearse how to admit error with specifics. Here is what we did. Here is why it was wrong. Here is what we will do next. Here is who will check our work. Apology that names steps becomes repair. Apology that asks applause becomes compulsion. We can point to places where these guardrails held. A synod that required 2 independent witnesses for extraordinary claims slowed panic. A city that published fee schedules for its gaolers made quiet cruelty harder to hide. A congregation that replaced public penance with private care saw fewer staged tears and more honest change. A denomination that built external safeguarding boards made it easier for children to be heard. A school that taught students to argue from both sides made it harder for zeal to pretend it was the only virtue in the room. None of this is dramatic. All of it saves people. We can point to places where they failed and why. Munster's elders closed their circuit and sped their clocks. The Taiping's decrees outpaced their ability to feed and hear. Jonestown erased outside review. Heaven's Gate sanctified separation until exit had one meaning. Salem trusted a kind of evidence that could not be shared. In each case, the fix is embedded in the failure. Open the circuit, slow the clock, multiply the voices, raise the threshold. Bring the table back to a size where a person can sit and be seen. A final caution. Guardrails are not a guarantee. They are habits. They must be practiced in easy weather, so they hold in storms. They must be taught to children in small things. Games, chores, stories, so that grown people can lean on them when the room grows hot. Communities that drill only for zeal will perform zeal. Communities that practice patience will have it to spend. Return to the shoulder and the blessing. Care is still the work. We do not abandon ritual because it can be misused. We surround it with reasons, consent, and time. We do not abandon discipline because it can be abused. We hold it to standards and publish them. We do not abandon faith because fear once borrowed its clothes. We teach faith to love the person more than the form. We have stood in many rooms. We have watched how a prayer can become a procedure, and a procedure a verdict. We have seen how dull tools kept doors from locking. We have seen how quickly bright stories can turn into schedules that cost too much. One part remains. It is not a case. It is an ending that does not end. It asks how to keep faith human when the next fear arrives and the cogs begin to hum. It asks what we will put in our pockets before we leave the house, so that, when the weather turns, our hands find mercy first. Morning again. The candle is out. Files are closed. Rooms are swept. The bell rings like any other day. Faith returns to where it began. Hands on shoulders. Bread on tables. Names spoken softly. The night teaches. The morning decides. What will we carry forward? Carry slowness. Not indifference. Slowness that gives conscience air. Slowness that lets a sentence meet a face. We have seen what haste can do in winter courts. walled cities, marching kingdoms, and rented rooms. Haste looks brave when fear is loud. Haste is only speed. Slow calendars are mercy's best tool. Write them, defend them, use them when the room's heart starts to race. Carry plurality, not muddle, plurality that widens counsel, so no single voice can close the door. We watched how crowns were made in a day, and how elders practiced unanimity like drill. We saw the cost of a leader who becomes a weather system. Plural leadership is dull on purpose. Dullness kept doors from locking in towns that put laity beside clergy and published minutes others could read. Choose the dull protection now, so you do not need the dramatic rescue later. Carry thresholds, not excuses. Thresholds that ask for reasons in writing. Thresholds that tell rumor it must dress as evidence before entering. We saw what happened when visions were filed as proof and dreams were read aloud like facts. Write the standard before the case arrives, then keep it when the case is hard. If you must err, err by saving a neighbor. Carry porousness, not naivete. Err from outside, an ombud's key, an unmonitored call. A visiting day that cannot be canceled without names attached to reasons. We saw what distance does when paired with policy. We saw how easy it is to love a voice and forget to test it. Build doors that open both ways. Let someone you do not appoint look in. Let them publish what they see. Carry consent, not theater. Care that is chosen, not staged. Confession that can stop without penalty. Help offered in rooms without microphones. We watch tender practices turn sharp under lights and schedules. When care becomes a show, it teaches the wrong lesson. Return the work to smaller rooms. Hold privacy like a sacrament. Ask before you speak a life aloud. Carry genre. Teach people to read. Law as law, poem as poem, proverb as proverb, vision as vision. Teach the difference between boundary and blade. We watched verses pinned to ration lists and prophecy filed as ordinance. Reading slowly is a moral act. If a line must change a life, read it twice. Carry apology, not performance. Words that name harm, name causes, and name repairs. The kind of apology that gives up power and budgets time. We saw how shame turns sorrow into stagecraft. Refuse applause. Practice contrition when the stakes are low, so that the heart knows what to do when they are heavy. Carry provision. Bread first. Rooms that hold a bed. Funds that buy time for appeal. We saw scarcity preach sermons that rules should never preach. Hunger frightens justice into speed. Put food in the cupboard so fear goes hungry instead. Carry the right to doubt and to stay. Teach children to ask why and to hear, I don't know. Drill it like fire practice. Rooms that welcome doubt are hard to stampede. Doubt keeps guardrails oiled and hinges honest. Carry memory. Not as a weapon, as a map. Write the hard years without varnish. Say names. Note weather. Record the little decisions that built the big mistake. Let future hands feel the paper's weight. We saw how memory can become a second siege when used to frighten. Use it to forewarn. Use it to teach young leaders that most disasters come from human good moving too fast in the wrong structure. Carry tenderness for those who believed and were harmed. It is easy to sneer from a distance. It is wrong. People joined because they were brave, lonely, hopeful, tired, hungry for meaning, hungry for justice, hungry for family. They brought real gifts. They were taught to spend those gifts in rooms that lost the plot. Honor the gifts. Fix the rooms. Carry the habit of asking who pays. Look at every rule and ask whose life it costs. If the answer is always the same women, the poor, the shy, the outsider, the person without papers, then the rule is a weapon, not a boundary. Redraft it, or retire it. Boundaries that protect ideas tear people. Boundaries that protect people teach ideas to be humble. Carry humor, the kind that breaks tension without breaking bones. We noticed how rooms under siege lost jokes. Laughter is not a cure. It is a valve. It can save a meeting from running hot. It can remind a chair that they are human and therefore fallible. It can turn a prophecy into a parable again. Keep it nearby. Carry neighbors, real ones, friends who do not attend your services, colleagues who do not vote your way, the stranger who is kind to your child. When fear tries to shrink your map, these people keep it wide. Invite them to read your standards before you need them. Let them walk your halls. Let them ask why you do things the way you do. Carry the discipline to stop using war words when you are not at war. Save enemy for armies. Save traitor for treason. In ordinary conflicts, say neighbor, disagreement, harm, repair. Language shapes the hand that holds the key. What you name a person is what you will allow yourself to do to them. Carry craft. Build procedures you could explain to a stranger on a doorstep. If your system cannot be told simply without hiding a cruelty, you do not have a system. You have a secret. Secrets turn rooms sour. Simplicity is not the enemy of depth. It is the enemy of fog. Carry Sabbaths that cannot be canceled by adrenaline. A day when nothing important is decided. A night when the lights go out on purpose. We watched midnight votes. We watched dawn regrets. Put rest between them. Rest is not a luxury. It is a break. Carry one sentence in your pocket. Better a slow mercy than a quick mistake. Say it when a file grows thick. Say it when a crowd grows loud. Say it when a leader glows and the room leans in too far. Your pocket sentence will not solve everything. It will buy a minute. A minute can save a name. Morning again. Stone keeps what it is given. Paper keeps what it is told. Keys lie quiet until a hand reaches. Faith lives in the hands. We have walked chambers where reverence learned to punish and rooms where zeal learned to count. We have named guardrails that kept doors from locking, and we have watched what happens when a hinge swings on oiled speed. There is no last page to this subject. Only practice. Only habit. Only the next meeting, where someone suggests that this time the stakes are too high to be careful. This is the moment your training matters. This is the moment to breathe, to widen the circle, to open the window, to ask who pays, to put the vote on the far side of sleep, to invite the quiet person to speak first. The story of faith turning into horror is not a curse. It is a warning label. It is a sketch of the weather. It is a set of tools laid on a bench. You will not always get to choose the storm. You will always get to choose your hands. Choose the tools. Choose the dull ones that keep people whole. The bell rings again. Someone lights a candle. Someone opens a book. Someone hums a tune a grandmother taught. A child swings her feet under a pew and watches dust in the beam. This is the room we protect. Not an idea. Not a file. Not a leader's glow. A room where a person can breathe and be corrected without being crushed, can belong without being bent, can doubt without being exiled, can pray without fear. Hold that image when the hinge creaks. And when it does, because it will, what will you do first? Will you loosen the schedule? Will you widen the table? Will you call the neighbor who never agrees with you and ask her to sit beside you? Will you write the reason, sign your name, and let it be read? The future of your faith lives inside those small answers. The door is in your hand. Where will you set the key?